Have you ever paused to think about the incredibly personal, often challenging journey of building a family, especially when, the traditional paths aren't quite possible?
It's such a deeply human desire, isn't it?
Absolutely. But then you introduce something like surrogacy, and suddenly it becomes this globally intricate topic.
Yeah, fraught with profound ethical and legal questions. These deeply personal quests, they intersect with national laws, international agreements, and deeply held societal values in, well, fascinating ways.
And it feels like it's becoming more relevant.
Definitely. Surrogacy is a rapidly evolving area. I mean, we see couples marrying later, declining fertility rates, and the reality that even successful IVF treatments hover around, a 50% success rate?
Right.
So for many, it's becoming a crucial, maybe even a last resort solution to infertility.
But as you said, it's far from simple. What makes it so incredibly complex, especially when families are looking across borders for these services?
Well, that's the thing. It's not just about individual choice anymore. These transnational arrangements can lead to some really difficult situations. Cross-border legal tussles, exploitation.
And heartbreakingly, even stateless children. I read about that.
Exactly. Which brings us to a vital question. How do societies balance these intense individual needs with the broader ethical and legal concerns, especially in such a sensitive area?
That's really our mission today. We're going on a deep dive, unpacking comprehensive sources to, extract the most important insights.
Try and uncover surprising facts, maybe navigate some of the nuances of law, ethics, and the human experience surrounding surrogacy.
Right. Our goal is to give you a shortcut to being well-informed on this vital and evolving subject with a specific focus on Singapore's unique position. So let's unpack this. Where do we start?
Okay, well, at its core, surrogacy is where a woman is artificially impregnated. Now, this could be with or without money changing hands, and the intention is that the child will be given to and adopted by another person or couple. It's considered a form of assisted reproductive treatment, or RT.
Got it. And crucially, here in Singapore itself, actually doing the surrogacy procedure, that's prohibited, right?
That's correct. It's simply not allowed locally.
But that's a key point, because despite this local ban, there's clear evidence that Singaporeans are going abroad to seek surrogacy services.
Right. And this creates a pretty significant legal vacuum.
A legal vacuum, absolutely, because our sources highlight there's currently, no law regulating Singaporeans' participation in surrogacy procedures overseas.
And really, no law addressing surrogacy arrangements at all.
Why is that? Just because it's unlawful here?
That's part of it, yeah. But it also suggests that Singapore hasn't yet settled on a clear public policy for surrogacy.
So a proper legal framework in Singapore is, as the sources put it, thus due. It's needed.
Seems so.
Okay, so to really understand how Singapore might navigate this incredibly complex issue, it's probably helpful to look at how other places handle surrogacy.
Exactly. We're going to examine the United Kingdom, Hong Kong, and California. Each offers a really distinct model and perspective.
Why those three specifically?
Well, they either share sort of similar legal foundations or priorities with Singapore, like the UK and Hong Kong, or they have extensive experience, like California, that offers clear insights into potential regulatory approaches and, their consequences.
Well, let's start with the UK then. What's their setup?
Their legal framework is governed by the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act, the HFEA, from 2008. That's basically their cornerstone law for this area.
Right.
The only outright prohibition they have is on embryos with altered DNA. Gametes, so sperm or eggs, can come from the commissioning parents, the surrogate mother, or even anonymous donors.
Okay, pretty open on the source of gametes. But what about payment? That seems to be a big sticking point globally.
It is. And the UK makes a crucial distinction between commercial and paid surrogacy. The Surrogacy Arrangements Act makes commercial surrogacy illegal, defining commercial as involving payment.
I sense a but.
Yeah, but it explicitly excludes payment to or for the benefit of a surrogate mother.
Okay, that's subtle. So they say no commercial surrogacy, but payments to the surrogate are okay.
Well, specifically, their courts are described as quite accepting of a wide range of permitted expenses.
And what counts as an expense? Just medical bills?
Oh, it's broader than that. It can include things like loss of earnings for the surrogate mother and her partner, pregnancy-related therapies, clothes.
Clothes? Really?
Yeah, and even a modest recovery break for the surrogate and her family. So it's definitely paid, but it's carefully defined, not as commercial.
Wow, okay. That's complex. What about who the legal parents are?
By default, the surrogate mother and her husband or civil partner are the legal parents. The commissioning parents have to apply for a parental order, and they need the surrogate mother's consent for that.
Makes sense.
And here's a key point. A genetic link must exist between the child and at least one commissioning parent. Though, interestingly, singles can now also apply for these parental orders.
Okay, genetic link required. Now, you mentioned surprising facts earlier. Anything about the UK system?
Yes, and this is a big one. Surrogacy arrangements are not enforceable if either party changes their mind.
Not enforceable, so someone could just back out.
Essentially, yes. Legally, the agreement itself doesn't hold up in court if there's a dispute over parentage later.
Wow. I can see how that would cause issues.
It truly does. This unenforceability, along with the uncertainty around payments for surrogates, is a big reason why many UK commissioning parents still choose to go abroad.
So the system isn't perfect.
Not at all. The UK Law Commission has actually highlighted these inadequacies and is actively reviewing the laws. Issues of consent and rights are really dominating their discussion.
Okay, that's a fascinating picture of the UK's evolving approach. Let's shift focus now to Hong Kong. You said it feels closer to home for Singapore.
In many ways, yes. It shares the British colonial past, it's an affluent cosmopolitan city, and crucially, it's deeply rooted in Asian values, which is a relevant comparison point for Singapore.
So how do they handle surrogacy? More restrictive.
Definitely more restrictive. Their Human Reproductive Technology Ordinance, the HRTO, significantly limits art for surrogacy. Commissioning parents must be married.
Okay, married couples only.
And donated gametes have to come from them. It's further restricted to situations where, and this is a quote, the wife in that marriage is unable to carry pregnancy to term and no other treatment option is practicable for her.
So very specific medical necessity tied to the married couple's own biology. What about payment?
Like the UK, they prohibit commercial surrogacy. No person can make or receive payment. However, they do exclude reimbursements for the ART procedure itself, any gamete donor's expenses, and the surrogate mother's RT and pregnancy-related expenses.
Similar expenses model to the UK, then?
Sort of, but the overall framework is much tighter. And importantly, this prohibition on commercial arrangements even extends to those made outside Hong Kong.
So they try to regulate what their citizens do abroad, too, and legal parenthood.
Very similar to the UK. It defaults to the surrogate mother and her husband. Commissioning parents need to apply for a parental order, and they need the surrogate's agreement.
And enforceability.
Yes, like the UK. No surrogacy arrangement is enforceable if parties change their minds.
Same issue again. How do those Asian values you mentioned shape this?
Well, looking at the broader context, traditional Confucian beliefs about social order and role expectations, they remain highly relevant in Hong Kong.
How so?
Reproduction issues are often framed less around individual rights, like in the West, and more as an obligation to carry on the family line.
Right, the lineage aspect.
Exactly. And that cultural underpinning heavily influences their more cautious, restrictive approach.
Okay, UK and Hong Kong, regulated, non-commercial, but with issues around enforceability and varying levels of restriction. Now, California sounds like it's different.
Oh, vastly different. California has really positioned itself as a commercial surrogacy center. They've actively put in place incentives and a robust legal framework.
How?
For starters, they have no restrictions on the surrogacy procedure or source of gametes used.
Wow, okay, big change.
And a key element, a legal arrangement is required before any medical procedures even start.
A mandatory contract up front.
Yes. And this contract demands specific information identity of gamete donors, commissioning parents, how medical expenses are managed. Crucially, both the commissioning parents and the surrogate mother must be represented by their own independent, licensed attorneys.
Independent lawyers for both sides. That sounds thorough. And payment. It is commercial there, right?
Yes, but it's regulated. Payment requires the involvement of a licensed, independent bonded escrow company or an attorney. So it's formalized, structured.
Right. Protects everyone involved, presumably. What about legal parenthood? This seems to be where the models really diverge.
Huge difference here. In California, the intended parent is treated in law as if he or she were the natural parent of a child thereby conceived.
Treated as the natural parent from the get-go.
Pretty much. And this parent-child relationship can even be legally established before the child is born.
Before birth, wow. That's a massive shift from the UK and Hong Kong default, where the surrogate is the initial legal mother.
Exactly. And what about enforceability?
Ah, yes, the big question. Are these Californian contracts enforceable?
Yes, they are. Unlike the UK and Hong Kong, surrogacy arrangements are enforceable in California. This was established in a landmark 1993 case, Johnson v. Calvert.
What did that case decide?
It recognized the commissioning parents as the legal parents based on their intent to procreate the child. This is often called parenthood by intent.
Parenthood by intent. So the intention to create and raise the child is legally paramount there.
Precisely. That intention is foundational.
What's the wider context for this very liberal approach in California?
Well, surrogacy issues there are deeply embedded in broader societal shifts. Changes in family structure, the evolving role of women, a long history of reproductive rights discourse.
And LGBTQ equality narratives, too, I imagine.
Absolutely. All those feed into it. And this permissive stance, it attracts commissioning parents from all over the world. Surrogacy in the U.S. is now a billion-dollar industry, with California at the center.
Okay, so summing up the comparisons. The UK shows the pitfalls of unenforceability, even with permitted expenses. Hong Kong highlights how cultural values can lead to tighter restrictions, but still faces that enforceability problem. And California demonstrates a fully commercial, enforceable framework driven by intent.
Right. These models offer Singapore really concrete lessons and potential warnings as it considers its own path.
But how do these international examples stack up against Singapore's own unique context, its values, its existing legal challenges? You mentioned a key court case earlier, UKMV Attorney General.
Indeed. This case is crucial. It involved a gay Singaporean father wanting to adopt his biological child, conceived via commercial surrogacy in the U.S.
Okay, so bringing a child born through paid overseas surrogacy back to Singapore. How did the court handle the payment aspect?
It was tricky. The High Court acknowledged that payment for surrogacy could technically be seen as an unlawful payment for adoption under Singapore law.
So a potential legal barrier.
But, and this is a really big but, they also ruled that if that payment was clearly made with a sincere desire to benefit and promote the child's welfare, the court could actually sanction it, approve it, essentially.
So the payment itself isn't an automatic deal breaker for adoption if the intent is deemed genuine, even for overseas commercial surrogacy.
That's the implication, yes. No absolute prohibition against paid surrogacy overseas if the adoption intent is judged to be sincere and focused on the child's well-being.
That is fascinating. What about legal parenthood in these situations? Is it clear who the parents are legally?
That's still described as unsettled for surrogacy specifically. However, the court did observe that for children born after Singapore's main law on assisted reproduction, that's SCARTA, the Status of Children, Assisted Reproduction Technology Act, parentage would likely fall to be determined under SCARTA. And in practice, genetic relation was used to assess parenthood in that specific UKM case context.
So the existing RT laws and genetics are providing some guidance, even without specific surrogacy laws.
It seems that way. And look at the numbers. Between 2008 and 2018, 10 out of 14 adoption applications in Singapore for children born through surrogacy were actually approved.
10 out of 14.
And in just 1 year, 2017, at least 15 children born via U.S. surrogacy were brought back to Singapore.
So this is happening. It's a practical reality, even if the legal framework isn't fully caught up.
Exactly. It suggests a reality that isn't fully reflected in the current legal silence on the matter.
This inevitably leads to the question, though. If surrogacy were to be fully allowed in Singapore, would it, as some fear, become seen as a selfish and convenient lifestyle choice rather than strictly a medical necessity?
That's a major concern raised in the sources, yes. The worry is that, say, middle-aged or postmenopausal career women might delay motherhood, thinking they can just use surrogacy later.
Potentially encouraging younger generations to do the same.
Right. And this perspective views such a trend as fundamentally anathema, completely opposed to the Asian family values vigorously promoted by Singapore government policymakers.
And technology plays a role here, too.
It could. Rapid advances in oocyte cryopreservation egg freezing could exacerbate this concern. It makes it technically easier for women to put off childbearing and then perhaps consider surrogacy much later in life.
Okay, so that's the slippery slope argument. What other concerns came up?
Another deeply human one is the maternal bond and potential custody issues. Evolutionary pressure creates a strong maternal instinct, right?
Oh, sure.
And we've seen reported instances globally where gestational surrogates, the women carrying the pregnancy, refuse custody afterwards. This leads to incredibly complex and long, drawn-out legal battles.
Like the baby gammy case in Thailand. That was awful.
Exactly. That case, for anyone who remembers, involved a surrogate who refused to abort a child diagnosed with Down syndrome. The commissioning parents then reportedly abandoned the child.
And that led Thailand to ban foreign surrogacy entirely, didn't it?
It did. It just perfectly illustrates how these deeply personal journeys can collide with global, legal, and ethical minefields, leading to heartbreaking outcomes. It's no wonder Thailand reacted so decisively.
Another major ethical red flag is the potential exploitation of disadvantaged women.
Yes, there's a clear global trend of richer countries effectively outsourcing surrogacy to poorer countries.
So the worry for Singapore would be,
If monetary reimbursement here became really lucrative, given Singapore's high living standards compared to neighbors, could it act as an undue inducement? Basically, a powerful financial lure for women from nearby developing countries where the economic disparity is huge.
that's a serious risk.
Yeah.
And related to money, what about outright commercialism?
Well, the sources suggest that fully commercialized surrogacy is likely to be morally and ethically repugnant to most Singaporeans, given the emphasis on traditional Asian family values.
And the risk isn't just the payment itself, but also third parties getting involved.
Precisely. There's a real risk of exploitative third parties, commercial agencies, maybe unethical doctors or clinics profiting unscrupulously, especially if they're the ones recruiting surrogates without proper oversight.
Okay, another critical angle is the child's welfare, especially if things don't go perfectly. What if a child is born with, say, congenital deformities?
This is a major legal and practical problem highlighted. Under current Singapore law, remember, the birth mother is the legal mother.
So, the surrogate.
Yes. If a child is born with significant health issues or disabilities and the commissioning parents refuse to adopt, which can happen.
The child is left in a legal limbo.
Exactly. And potentially becomes an unwarranted burden and cost to the state. Plus, the stark reality is that very few local couples in Singapore would adopt a child with disabilities.
Can't pre-implantation genetic testing PGT avoid this?
PGT, which screens embryos before implantation, can certainly avoid some known genetic defects. Yeah. But it cannot prevent all congenital deformities. Some, like spina bifida or cerebral palsy, can arise due to environmental factors during pregnancy, not just genetics.
Right. So PGT isn't a complete solution. This naturally leads to the whole designer babies concern, doesn't it? Especially when third-party gametes are involved.
It does. There's a major ethical worry when surrogacy is combined with donor eggs from a third woman, someone who is neither the intended social mother nor the gestational carrier.
It raises the question of shopping for quality or designer genes.
Yes, and treating human babies like purchasable commodities. Plus, it exposes the egg donor, the third party, to her own set of medical risks from the egg retrieval process.
How does this fit with Singapore's cultural context around family?
Well, as we touched on with Hong Kong, Singapore's reasons for procreation are often framed similarly, carrying on the family bloodline. There was even a Court of Appeal case, ACB v. Thompson Medical, that recognized genetic affinity as a new type of damage the court could consider.
Genetic affinity, so that biological link is seen as really important.
Seems so. Procreation here is often viewed less as an assertion of individual rights and more as an extension of a marriage.
Which suggests?
It suggests that if Singapore were to regulate surrogacy, limiting commissioning parents to married couples using their own gametes might align better with this cultural emphasis on biological relation in defining parenthood.
Interesting. Okay, one last major consideration. The equality debate. How does that play out in Singapore regarding surrogacy?
This is quite distinct from Western discussions. The sources state the equality debate in Singapore is more about the socioeconomic divide.
Meaning?
It's about the gap between those who can afford to go overseas for surrogacy, often at great expense, and those who simply cannot. It's less focused on individual reproductive rights arguments common in, say, the U.S. or parts of Europe.
Why the difference?
Singapore's strong communitarian focus, the idea, the society above self, tends to mute those individual rights discussions compared to more individualistic societies.
Okay, so we have this complex picture. A local ban, citizens going abroad, comparisons showing different models, and a whole host of specific Singaporean challenges, ethical, social, legal, cultural. Given all that, what are some potential ways forward? What pathways are being proposed?
Well, a fundamental starting point seems to be, if this reproductive tourism is happening anyway, maybe it's better to regulate it rather than pretend it doesn't exist.
Makes sense. Control what you can.
And to address that slippery slope concern we talked about,
Right.
One proposal is for the Ministry of Health, MOH, to review and approve gestational surrogacy only on a case-by-case basis, strictly for medical necessity.
Like you'd have to prove you medically need it.
Exactly. And the argument is that given Singapore's efficient civil service and the likely small number of cases, this kind of individual assessment is actually practical.
Okay. What about specific safeguards for the surrogates themselves? That seems crucial.
Absolutely. Several are proposed. One is to restrict gestational surrogates to Paris married women with stable family relationships.
Paris meaning they've given birth before.
Yes. And specifically, banning single women with no children. The idea is to help ensure informed choice and adequate emotional coping support for the surrogate.
And what about preventing the exploitation of foreign women?
A key recommendation is to exclude foreign women from acting as surrogates in Singapore, except possibly for close relatives and family members of the commissioning couple.
Why the exception for relatives?
The thinking is that surrogacy arrangements between kin are much less likely to end in disputes or exploitation. The main goal is to avoid cross-border legal tussles, diplomatic issues, and taking advantage of economically disadvantaged women from other countries. So restricting it largely to Singaporean citizens and permanent residents is strongly suggested.
Okay, clear boundaries there. What about regulating the money side? If full commercialization is out, what's proposed?
While commercialized surrogacy is seen as morally and ethically repugnant, the idea is that monetary reimbursement or compensation should be permitted, but only if it's strictly based on the direct expenses model.
Like we saw in the UK and Hong Kong examples,
Yep.
covering actual costs.
Exactly. Things like nutrition, medical fees, travel, loss of earnings for the surrogate, and crucially, these payments must be well audited to prevent abuse. Perhaps MOH could assign healthcare social workers specifically for this oversight task.
So, transparency and accountability on the money. What about overseeing the whole arrangement? Who manages the process ethically?
This is vital. It's strongly suggested to strictly limit the role of medical professionals just to providing the fertility treatment itself.
Keep them out of the recruitment and payment side.
Yes. Keep them out of recruiting surrogates, counseling them, handling reimbursements. The worry is potential conflicts of interest and profit motives clouding medical judgment.
So who should handle it?
The proposal is for MOH to set up a specialized department or agency dedicated to the ethical recruitment, counseling, and reimbursement of surrogates. This body would function independently of the medical professionals doing the treatment.
Like the National Gamete Donation Trust in the UK, maybe.
Something like that, yes. The goal is to ensure medical professionalism stays focused on treatment quality, not on recruitment numbers or financial arrangements.
That separation of duties sounds sensible. Now, what happens if, despite everything, a child is born with issues and the commissioning parents hesitate?
The proposal here is quite firm. The surrogacy contract should be legally binding for the commissioning couple to accept the child, even if born with congenital deformities.
Legally binding acceptance.
Yes. And if the couple refuses, they should be made financially liable for the potentially very high costs of that child's special needs upbringing.
Puts the responsibility squarely back on them. What about the medical procedures themselves, and any guidelines proposed there?
Yes, setting stringent guidelines for the judicious use of more intensive procedures like hormone stimulation, IVF, and ICSI, especially on surrogates who are otherwise healthy and fertile, particularly in traditional surrogacy where the surrogate's own egg is used. Because sometimes cheaper, less invasive options like IUI intrauterine insemination with the commissioning father's sperm might be sufficient, avoiding unnecessary risks and costs for the surrogate.
Okay, using the least invasive, effective method, and back to the designer baby concern, what about limiting third-party gametes?
The recommendation is to generally disallow combining surrogacy with donor eggs from a third woman.
Generally disallowed. Are there exceptions?
Yes, perhaps under specific limited circumstances. For example, if it's necessary to maintain a genetic link to the intended social mother, maybe via an egg donation from one of her maternal blood relatives, like a sister.
Ah, okay, so exceptions tied to maintaining that family genetic connection.
Exactly. The overall aim is to prevent shopping for quality or designer genes and reduce unnecessary medical risks for third-party egg donors.
This all sounds very cautious, very measured. Is there a suggestion on how Singapore might introduce this, maybe gradually?
Yes, a phased approach is proposed. 2 stages. Make surrogacy available locally, but only to a narrow group. Think uncontroversial cases, similar maybe to Hong Kong's position, married couples using their own gametes where there's clear medical necessity.
Keep it very restricted initially.
Right. And during this first stage, maybe even consider banning overseas surrogacy temporarily.
Why ban overseas if you're allowing it locally?
To kind of stem the tide of complex transnational cases, and give Singapore time to carefully weigh even more complex issues like using gametes from deceased donors or surrogacy for non-married people before opening the door wider.
Okay, so stage 1 is a cautious local start, then stage 2.
Stage 2 would involve a more nuanced approach, potentially allowing a greater range of surrogacy arrangements. This might eventually include permitting transnational surrogacy, but only if it falls within clearly defined official guidelines.
A very pragmatic, step-by-step process. What about public opinion in all this?
That's seen as crucial. It's recommended that the Ministry of Health conduct a public referendum, or at least wide consultation, on legalizing gestational surrogacy.
Really engage everyone.
Yes, actively consult healthcare professionals, religious and community leaders, and the general public. Get broad input.
So a real societal conversation. And finally, even if surrogacy is eventually approved, what are the likely ongoing restrictions likely to be?
Given the highly conservative nature of Singapore society, as the sources describe it, and the current RT directives that limit access primarily to married couples,
Yes.
it's considered very unlikely that single women or gay or lesbian couples would be permitted to use gestational surrogates, even under a legalized framework.
Okay, so access would likely remain quite restricted based on marital status and perhaps orientation.
That seems the most probable outcome according to the analysis.
Wow, we've covered a tremendous amount today. From Singapore's current ban, the complexities of citizens going abroad, the critical need for a legal framework.
Looking at those global examples, the UK, Hong Kong, California, seeing the different ways this can be handled for better or worse.
Right, and diving deep into Singapore's specific challenges, ethical, social, legal, and these very thoughtful, detailed proposals for moving forward.
And that underlying point remains. Without a clear legal framework here, individuals who have the means will continue to seek surrogacy overseas,
Incurring, as the sources say, greater legal risks and ethical challenges, leaving the courts here to react only after a child has already been born.
which, as we've discussed, can lead to incredibly difficult, painful situations for everyone involved.
So it really leaves us with a profound question, doesn't it? What does all this mean for the future of family, law, and ethics, not just in Singapore, but globally in a rapidly evolving world? And maybe what is the true cost of inaction when these complex moral questions and powerful medical advancements collide? Something to really think about.